Hi guys. Today we're going to be talking about boundaries. I am going to be busting some myths about boundaries, what they are and what they're not. And this is inspired from the group coaching call from my program Magnetic Minds today. And I'm kind of riffing off of a theme that came up in that call today. So if you haven't joined Magnetic Minds, DM me and I can give you more details about it. But let's talk about boundaries today. Hey Nadine, welcome. Okay, so when we're talking about boundaries, I didn't understand that for the longest time that boundaries were so integral, so important to my success as an entrepreneur. I didn't know this, and I also didn't have really good boundaries. I already miss you too. Mwah. I love our calls, Nadine. You always keep it real, and I absolutely love that about you. So last year, I led myself through the process that became my program, Magnetic Minds, and part of that involved removing the block of attachment. And as I removed the block of attachment, I then recognized that if I wanted to remain at cause for getting what I wanted in life and being able to independently move forward and move through my life without feeling like I needed to wait on my circumstances to be just right. Hi, it was a pandemic. My circumstances were absolutely not going to be just right. So if I didn't want to be always waiting for the perfect time to do something, then the way that I had to be at cause was through creating boundaries. Having boundaries in your professional life, in your personal life, is so important because when you don't have boundaries, you are constantly waiting on your circumstances. You're constantly waiting for something to give you permission to create the results you want to create. So if you want to make more money in a month, you're constantly waiting for people to show interest. You're waiting for your posts to get noticed on Instagram. If you are wanting to book more clients, you're waiting for your content to take off. You're waiting for people to notice you. You're constantly waiting. And the solution to that isn't to take action, ironically enough. It's to have boundaries. Now, you might be like, wait, why wouldn't I just take action? Because when you have boundaries, you take action. When you have boundaries, you recognize that I am not my circumstances. My circumstances aren't happening to me. My circumstances are just happening, and I can choose to keep going in my life. Okay, so boundaries give you a few vital things in your life and your business. So I want to talk about those, but then most importantly to most people probably, I want to bust a few myths about boundaries, a few common misconceptions that we have about boundaries and our experience with maybe people pushing on our boundaries when we do establish them. So if you have questions about boundaries or you have had an experience that was negative with people you care about once you've set boundaries in your life, drop it in the comments box. All right. Thank you guys for being here. Okay. So when we have boundaries in our lives, we start to see that things happening in my life are not happening to me. I'm not at the effect of everything in my life. I used to live my life feeling very much like I was a ship tossed to and fro. And like if the weather turned, then I was doomed. I always lived my life feeling like I was doomed. And it wasn't until I learned to empower myself with boundaries that I started seeing that like this image that I had of a ship caught in a storm, kind of like going up and down and all over the waves and being pummeled and tossed, right? This is how I felt about how I was living my life. Felt like I couldn't help it. I was doomed. Everything was happening to me. I had to recognize that even in the storm, even when I had this mental image of the ship tossing around, there was still somebody driving the ship. There's always a captain of the ship. And suddenly I realized how I could empower myself by no matter what's happening in the world, I still drive the ship. I don't let my circumstances define me. I define my circumstances back to, I don't define myself by my circumstances. I define my circumstances back to me. Okay. Savannah, I see your question. That's such a good one. Okay, we'll talk about that. If you do have questions about boundaries, drop them in the comments and we'll do some Q&A. Okay, this is going to be so good. I'm so excited. Okay, so hopefully by now you're seeing that having boundaries in your life is not just valuable, not just important, not just essential, but it's life-giving and it's empowering. It's not this hard thing that we have to do, although it can be if that's how you want it to be. So many people who have not previously had boundaries in their life or haven't really known how to have boundaries in their lives, they think it's this hard thing that they have to suddenly be mean to people. So myth number one, boundaries aren't about you being mean to people. However, they are about you learning to be empowered in your life and you learning to show up in your life with confidence and direction and focus that allows you to build momentum toward the end result that you want. Okay, so let's talk about a few myths that people have around boundaries, that these come up so often. I had these myths, I believe these myths myself, and these themes come up with my clients all the time. Okay, so first thing I want you to do, and this is a little unconscious mind trick. I want you to listen to how you describe establishing boundaries. So often, what I hear people say is that I have a hard boundary there, or I enacted my boundary on someone. And it cracks me up because it sounds like a fight, or it sounds like you just built some kind of a moat or like a castle wall. It sounds like you just started a war. I would dread that too, to be honest with you. So do you say things like, I have hard boundaries. I had to hold my boundaries with that person. I had to enact my boundaries on someone, like it's some kind of eject protocol. Those are not boundaries. That's you being frustrated. So let's talk about that. If I'm speaking truth that you have never heard before, welcome. This is the stuff that I teach in my program, Magnetic Minds. We have a whole 1 hour module on boundaries, and it comes right after we do some deep unconscious mind work around releasing attachment and forgiveness and understanding what to do when people hold us back in our lives or when they try to hold us back in our lives. So if this is all speaking to you and you know that you need support around this, that's a next step for you. And what you can do is DM me for more information about Magnetic Minds and just tell me, hey, I was on your live. You talked about this program, Magnetic Minds and boundaries. Tell me more. Okay. The words you use about boundaries tell you how you think about boundaries. And that's why most people avoid them. They think it's hard. They think it's some kind of a war. They feel guilty. Like Savannah, like you asked, how do you set boundaries without feeling guilty? Then the second question that the second problem people typically have is that people push their boundaries. They realize they need to have boundaries, and some of them may be very simple, and they create a dedicated time where they respond to their emails or their Voxes, and then they have office hours, and then they have downtime, personal time, time off, time that they're not working. Right? These fairly normal things. And all of a sudden that client gets in touch. You said you were done at 5 and they reach out to you at 5:01? What in the world? Don't they know I have a boundary. I've told them before, I am done at 5, right? Why are they pushing? I have these clients and they are just pushing my boundaries. So I have some truth for you. People don't push our boundaries. They don't. I'm going to say that one more time. If you're like, that's not been my experience. People do not push your boundaries. People mimic the behavior they see from you. Chances are, if you struggle with people pushing your boundaries, it's because they have seen you not respect yourself. They have seen you break promises to yourself, and they don't know they're doing it, but they're unconsciously mimicking the behavior that you have made acceptable. And neither of you know you're doing it because you're doing it unconsciously out of you're the tyranny of the urgent, and they're just responding in like form. You don't enact boundaries on people. You respect your own boundaries. You set your own boundaries. You honor them for yourself. You communicate your own boundaries, and then you decide what you choose to do when somebody pushes a boundary or breaks or tries to break a boundary. And here's what happens. If you have felt like a lot of people in your life are pushing a boundary or breaking your boundaries, do that and choose okay, if people are constantly pushing my boundaries, what do I do? And what I teach inside of Magnetic Minds is, number 1, you communicate the boundary. Especially once people have crossed it, they don't push a boundary, they cross them. Because in their mind, they don't have these boundaries and lines and all of that. That's in our minds. So they cross boundaries. That's all they do. Okay, so you communicate the boundary when somebody's crossed it, and then you've got to decide what you're going to do. Okay, so this is how it could look. Here's an example. Hey, I appreciate your reaching out to me. I will be back in my office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. and I'll be happy to respond to this question then. Very simply. If this is in your personal relationships and you have people in your life who are constantly crossing boundaries, maybe they are being manipulative in the way that they are talking to you, and until now, that's been totally acceptable. And you're going, well, what do I do now? I have these boundaries and they keep crossing them or pushing them. They know better. I want you to remember that it's only you that respects your boundaries. Everyone else is just modeling. Only you respect your boundaries. Everyone else is just modeling. And if you want a full breakdown of what we do when people push and cross and break and whatever our boundaries, especially in really hard situations, maybe there's name calling involved, maybe there's manipulation and gaslighting tactics involved, you gotta get in my program, Magnetic Minds. Okay, so I hope this is valuable to you. A few things that I want to leave you with in closing today are, number 1, I want you to ask yourself, if you're evaluating your own boundaries and what these can look like for you, I want you to ask yourself, are people treating me the way I want to be treated? And then I want you to ask yourself, do I feel like I have people always pushing boundaries when I do set them? Okay, so if that second question isn't relevant because you just don't really have any boundaries and you just constantly feel burned out and there's always so much communication happening in your life, that second question might not even be relevant. But take those 2 questions, do a little journaling on them, maybe do a little thinking. I find journaling to be the most empowering because it's a different form of processing using different portions of the brain. So it does a little more in-depth for you as you're getting clarity than just thinking does. Okay, so journal on those. Are people treating me the way I want to be treated? Look at all your relationships, familial relationships, romantic relationships, partnering relationships, business relationships, all of that. And then I want you to ask yourself if it applies. Do I feel like once I know my boundaries, do I feel like I always have people pushing them? Okay. If this spoke to you, resonated with you, if this got some things going inside your mind, send me a DM. I would love to chat with you. I'd love to hear where you're at in your journey, creating personal power through setting your own boundaries. You've got this, you can do it, and this is the way for you to stand in your power. All right, if we have never connected before, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you, and I believe that everything you desire is absolutely meant for you. I wish you all the best. Bye, guys.